can imagine, today's a very special day, so I don't exactly have too much to kick this off with other than Happy 80th. If you know what that is, well, you know. If you don't, today basically is like the 80th anniversary since the Railway Series began, the whole thing that started the franchise that gives you Railway Series Customs. And as such, I figured no better day to kick off with the first Railway Series Customs video in like ages than by going over the entirety of the first 12, including the whys, the history, etc. So, I think it's best that I don't bore you after keeping you guys waiting so long. And who better to start with than the star biller himself, right here. This right here is Thomas. Yes, I know. Very simple chap he is. However, it's immediate to see that he is not an E2 anymore, and as I said last time, that is because his basis has been changed to be a Tenant J76. It was mostly for the flat running board, but also for the fact that the cab flowed in a way that I liked, and it allowed for a greater character history. For example, due to some of them being rebuilds of G6s, or the bulk of them being G6s, it's been a minute since I've checked again, it gave the precedent for him to not be some fresh off the shops, so to speak, newbie, but this engine which came from a line of rebuilds that was rebuilt himself, and thus had a fresh start in terms of to best summarize it, old body, young soul. That's this man right here. And I'll give you a good old look around of the J76 boyo here, which is honestly a class that is relatively slept on, considering, like a lot of Tenant engines, they were made to be this gap filler during motor power crises. And I respect that. And in terms of his origin, as you imagine, he still comes into the NWR under the flag of war, although most specifically, he comes in the post-war fog, considering a lot of in-universe stuff has changed now. I won't get into it fully now, but I'll say that, yeah, 1923 grouping, it applies to everybody. Sudgeons are not excluded from that. So that is this man. And of them all, he would probably be the main one who doesn't get a rebuild, if I'm one of the few who doesn't get a rebuild here. Because, another thing for this, instead of doing the typical format, like I said, I'm also going to go into who you can expect to see and what's going to go happen next. So, as you can see here, that's Thomas pretty much done. Smug boyo, and away he goes. And next up, we get up to one of the first who will need a bit of a rebuild. This here is Edward. Now, Edward here is modeled after one of the D40 class locomotives. These were Great North of Scotland engines, and I'm not gonna lie, they're probably some of my favorites, just because of their vintage look, but also the modernity they gained later with the two that got tender cabs. I believe it was two, because a few photos I found of it, two different numbers. And as you can see, I tried to model that here, but tender's too long, and generally I screwed up the cab. So he will definitely see a shop visit to bring him up to line. And of course get a new video to cover this, and more thorough look at his new lore, when that is time. He has glasses because I figured that at some point, Edward would definitely get glasses. He'd need it. No matter what basis you go for, he is an old soul. And old souls, sometimes your eyes can't see as well. So, that's the Edward boy. Everything was more or less modeled based off the actual thing, except for the obvious fact that now it's kind of not up to the quality. Well, as you'll see, come the next roasters, because I'm not up to the new scratch quality that I've kind of been pushing for. So with that, we'll get the boy out the way. And here comes Henry. Now, Henry's already been rebuilt to more or less the perfect replica of a Black 5, you'd find. But he is not the sort of Black 5 that I want him to be, and he's one of the first few with a slight basis alteration. The Henry I'm envisioning will probably become a Caprati 5. on the likes of, more so along the likes of the last two, which I believe their numbers were 44686 and 44687. Those two. If you need a reference, pull up those numbers, and you'll kind of see that they have this more hench look, like big, like tall shoulders built like a brick, sort of look. Which I think would be interesting to see Henry on, and I'm not gonna lie, having him be a base Black 5, while easy, I feel like there's a bit more leeway to go into that because he's spent his whole life as an experiment. So wouldn't it be fitting to see him kind of continue that sort of trend and triumph? So yeah, I'll give you a quick rotate, and you can see that generally the portions were pretty spot on for him, and do scream of the quality that I had 10. And at the very least in his rebuild, I can at least reuse his boiler, so that'll at least be something, you know? So round and round they go, and that tender that has been there since the very start of this, we'll finally see a rebuild. Yes, that's right, that tender is from the very first Henry model I made. I think this time it's time to retire the poor thing, but you never know. And then we have Gordon, or should I say the two Gordons? Because as you damn well know, if you don't already know, there's two of them. Hello. You've got the younger one, you have the older one. Now the older one obviously sticks to the experimental roots, true and true, running board, dip, all that shit, and will generally not need any replacement because it's the perfect ideal form for that form of Gordon. However, this second Gordon, who honestly I was tired of that bit and has now just and will now just go by Azzy or Azure, he's going to need a bit of ramification, considering that now, again, to fit in with the new quality I'm looking of, he's going to need a rebuild. Because, fun fact for you people, if you don't see the flaw here, let me tell you right now, tender too big. This entire time I've been modeling the 8-wheel tenders wrong, and thusly, you know, that's going to have to change. It's going to have to be fixed, remedied. And I gladly take on the challenge, so I'll give you a quick run around. And generally his bases will not change. The only thing that will change is that I'm going to go with the German wit style deflectors the A3's gotten rid of life, because as much as it's fun to slap humorous flaps everywhere, I feel like nah. That's too class member specific, and I feel like, you know, it'd take away from humorous charm. Even if I could right away, like the original plan, right away to where they were gifted, I think nah. Keep humorous special, give this boy his own flair. So away he goes with the other three. And next we get up to James, who I should honestly not even... You can already look and tell what's going to be fixed. Smoke box is a bit too far back. And if I'm honest, that tender from the very first iteration needs to go. And considering some new history I'm coming up for the James of this verse, I think that would make sense to completely junk that and get a new one that fits the origins better. But generally, I don't much forget the idea I went with. So give a little once over of what is supposed to be a Brighton K. Brighton K mobile. Boof. Now next up, we have Percy. Just a tiny little 12-inch Barkley. Honestly, you love it. Just a tiny little dude. And we should respect it. And generally, I'm not changing this boy. I like him as an Andrew Barkley. Nice, tiny, fit for working as a station pilot for a while, and fit for just doing short little trips on the branch and light shunting duties. I think it works perfectly fine. And hey, better than being 16 different designs in one single form, right? Look at this face. He doesn't even know who builds them anymore. Except now he does. Woo. Next up, Tobias. Nope, Toby. This isn't a devilish tram. This is just a chill dude with a mustache. Toby is basically the perfect representation of how I want him to be. He still keeps the front skirts, etc. But he shows off the later style with the side skirts trimmed back to show off the valve gear, which the J70s had, which generally, I kind of like it when they show it off. I'm a fan of that sort of switcher style setup, just because of how dense everything is, how packed everything is together, and how just makes it look so much more industrial. So we'll give you a quick once around. Do do do. Do do do. Tobias the Tram Engine. Genuinely, you love him. I love him. Don't know about you guys, but I love him. And speaking of other boys I love, it's Duck, who is in fact a 5400 and not a 5700, because I'm going to be honest, don't much care for him. I do not care for the 5700s. I like the brick style of panniers, which includes the 7400s, 6400s, and the 5400s. And genuinely, this is like the epitome of... This is peak Duck for me. Very much peak Duck. You love him. I definitely love him. And as you can see, he obviously traded the Great Western Railway paint off because, at least in terms of his lore, it just doesn't work for him anymore. Though, one thing that everybody here is definitely going to be visiting the shops for is to get the numbers patched over with NWR. So, yeah, that'll be the big difference you'll see come the start of the new models coming in. But Duck will not be one of those ones who needs a new one, because he's perfectly fine as is. So now two who definitely need a new one in due time. Donut and Dougie, Donald and Douglas, the Scottish twins. 652 class Caledonian boys. Oh boy, I didn't do you two justice at all. But that'll change. In terms of just generally some of the behind the scenes things that have changed in their basis, as you know, some of the others are getting it tweaked. These two are also getting it tweaked. They won't be 652s or 812s in terms of being, add-ons or anything of that like. They'll be older, slightly older 060s that are still Caledonian in nature, that being the 294s, because I've taken a better liking to those, if I'm going to be honest, and considering that in this universe they arrive earlier, it makes the most sense for them to be something that would be dumped earlier. And gives an interesting temptation to tap into the class's ROD days, because, fun fact, 294s served in the ROD. I'm not joking. It's crazy. I was crazy once. Now we have Ollie. Olly Ollie Oxenfree. Not the one who's got his bases changed, but generally his model probably won't ever get touched in terms of that front. Because while I've changed him from a 1400 to a 5172 again in line up with the fact that he arrives much earlier here, as it makes more sense for him to be a class that is older and due for withdrawal than a younger class that just has an extra that they need to dump off. I think the model here perfectly represents, or at least comes close to representing that late stage 517. He might get one rebuilt in the future, but generally, he can wait. He looks fine as he is now. And there isn't much to say outside of him being, auto tank. So away the auto tank goes to the last one of today's video. Emmeline, who is definitely getting stripped to bits and built into a new shape. Because another basis change. I know, crazy. I changed bases like I changed trousers, but yeah. Rather than being the Ivet D1 that I've modeled her as here, I've decided to take a leap of faith and make her an Atlantic. So, as you can imagine, a 440 wheel arrangement isn't going to cut it to be an Atlantic. So, that'll be her going by. But she will still be an Ivet. She'll become a Klondike that grows up into the giant, big, fat, fucking C1. But, all the same, it was nice having her as this shape. And, generally, I'm still very much proud of her. So, it wasn't all bad. So, in fairness, that will probably be it for now, but sorry again for all this delay and stuff. Things behind the scenes have been basically hellish, but RWS Customs will continue and come back. As well as other things, because I'm not exactly just a one-interest guy. But, to cut the story short, you guys all have a wonderful day. This has been Duke of the Dark Shops.